You have everything you're supposed to want: the career, the relationship, the house, the life that looks absolutely perfect from the outside. Your social media is curated beautifully. Your friends think you've made it. Your family is proud. But when you're alone, when the distractions fade and you're left with just yourself, there's this gnawing emptiness that you can't explain and can't escape. You feel like a fraud living someone else's life. And the worst part is, you can't tell anyone, because on paper, you have no right to feel this way. If this resonates with you, you're not broken, you're not ungrateful, and you're definitely not alone. What you're experiencing is something Carl Jung spent his entire life trying to help people understand. And today, we're going deep into why your perfect life feels so profoundly empty. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because on this channel, we explore the psychology and philosophy that actually explains the human experience, not the surface-level self-help that tells you to just think positive and be grateful. This is about real transformation, so let's dive in. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, had patients who came to him with exactly this problem. Successful people, accomplished people, people who had achieved everything society told them to achieve. And yet they sat in his office describing a profound sense of meaninglessness, a feeling that something essential was missing from their lives. Jung didn't dismiss this as ingratitude or depression, though depression could certainly be a symptom. He recognized it as something far more significant, a spiritual and psychological crisis that he believed was one of the defining problems of modern life. Jung called this the problem of the persona. Now, the persona is a term he borrowed from ancient theater, where actors would wear masks to represent different characters. In Jungian psychology, the persona is the mask you wear in social situations, the version of yourself you present to the world. It's the professional you at work, the agreeable you with acquaintances, the successful you on social media. And here's the thing, having a persona isn't bad. It's actually necessary. We all need to adapt to different social contexts and play certain roles in society. The problem arises when you become completely identified with your persona, when the mask becomes so convincing that you forget there's a real person underneath. You've spent so long being who you're supposed to be, achieving what you're supposed to achieve, wanting what you're supposed to want, that you've lost touch with who you actually are. The emptiness you feel isn't random. It's your psyche screaming at you that you're living a life that looks perfect from the outside, but has no connection to your authentic inner self. Think about how this happens. From the time you're a child, you receive messages about who you should be. Your parents have expectations. Teachers reward certain behaviors and punish others. Society presents a clear template for success. Get good grades, go to university, land a prestigious job, buy a house, get married, have children, accumulate wealth and status. And if you're someone who's good at following this template, you do it. You check all the boxes, you build the perfect life. But somewhere along the way, you stopped asking yourself what you actually want. You stopped listening to the quiet voice inside that has its own desires, its own values, its own vision for what a meaningful life looks like. Jung believed that the first half of life is naturally about building your persona and establishing yourself in the world. This is appropriate and necessary. You need to develop competence, build relationships, find your place in society. But there comes a point, often around midlife, but sometimes earlier or later, when the persona-building project feels hollow. You've achieved the goals, but instead of fulfillment, you feel empty. This is what Jung called the individuation crisis, and it's actually an invitation to the most important work of your life. Individuation is Jung's term for the process of becoming who you truly are, of integrating all the parts of yourself that you've ignored, suppressed, or never explored in your rush to build a successful persona. It's about discovering your authentic self, beneath the layers of social conditioning, family expectations, and cultural programming. And this process is rarely comfortable because it requires you to confront everything you've been avoiding. One of the key concepts Jung introduced is the shadow. The shadow is the part of your psyche that contains all the qualities, desires, and potentials that you've rejected or repressed because they didn't fit with the persona you were trying to build. Maybe you wanted to be an artist, but you became an accountant because it was practical. That artistic impulse didn't disappear. It went into your shadow. Maybe you're naturally introverted, but you forced yourself to be outgoing and social because that's what seemed to lead to success. That authentic introversion is in your shadow. Maybe you have anger or wildness or unconventional desires that you've suppressed because they weren't acceptable. All of that is lurking in your shadow, and it's taking up enormous psychic energy to keep it suppressed. The emptiness you feel is partly because you're using so much energy to maintain the persona and repress the shadow that there's nothing left for genuine vitality and engagement with life. You're exhausted from being someone you're not, and your psyche knows, even if your conscious mind doesn't want to admit it, that you're living a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a lie nonetheless. You're pretending that the mask is the real you, and deep down, you know it isn't. Jung also talked about the concept of the self with a capital S, which is different from the ego or the persona. The self is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, all the contradictions and complexities that make up a complete human being. The goal of individuation is to move from ego identification and persona identification to self-realization. It's about becoming whole rather than just successful, and wholeness includes darkness, includes failure, includes the parts of you that don't fit neatly into society's expectations. This is why people who seem to have everything can feel so empty. They've achieved ego success and persona perfection, but they haven't done the deeper work of becoming themselves. They've climbed the ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. And the tragedy is that our culture doesn't prepare us for this. We're given endless advice on how to succeed, but almost no guidance on how to become authentic. We're taught to achieve, but not to individuate. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like in real life. Imagine someone who becomes a doctor because their parents were doctors, because it's prestigious, because it guarantees financial security. They go through medical school, complete their training, establish a successful practice. From the outside, they've made it, but inside, they feel dead. They realize they never actually wanted to be a doctor. They did it for approval, for security, for the persona of being a successful physician. Their real passion might have been music or teaching or carpentry or something completely different, but they never gave themselves permission to explore it because it didn't fit the template for success. Now they're 45 years old, financially comfortable, socially respected, and profoundly miserable. The emptiness they feel isn't about ingratitude. It's about inauthenticity. They've built a beautiful prison, and they're the only inmate. This is the persona trap, and it's incredibly common among high achievers who've spent their lives doing what they should, rather than discovering what they truly want. Jung believed that when you ignore the call to individuation, when you refuse to confront your shadow and discover your authentic self, your psyche will force the issue. This often manifests as what we call a midlife crisis, but it can happen at any age. You might experience anxiety, depression, physical symptoms with no medical cause, relationship breakdowns, sudden career changes that seem irrational to everyone around you. These aren't signs of failure. They're signs that your psyche is demanding you pay attention to the parts of yourself you've been neglecting. Some people respond to this crisis by doubling down on the persona. They buy a sports car, have an affair, get cosmetic surgery, throw themselves even more obsessively into work. These are distractions, attempts to silence the psyche's call without actually doing the work of transformation. And they never work for long because the emptiness returns. The only way through is through. You have to actually do the work of individuation. So what does that work look like? Jung was a big proponent of exploring the unconscious through various methods. Dream analysis was central to his practice. Your dreams, he believed, are messages from the unconscious, showing you what you're repressing, what you're avoiding, what needs attention. Keeping a dream journal and learning to interpret the symbols and patterns in your dreams can provide profound insights into your shadow and your authentic desires. Active imagination is another technique Jung developed. This involves engaging with unconscious content through creative expression, dialoguing with inner figures, exploring fantasies and images that arise spontaneously. It's not about making art for others. It's about using creativity as a tool for self-discovery. You might write conversations with different parts of yourself. You might paint or sculpt images that emerge from your unconscious. You might engage in visualization practices where you explore inner landscapes. This isn't woo-woo nonsense. It's a legitimate psychological technique for accessing parts of yourself that can't be reached through rational analysis alone. Therapy, particularly Jungian analysis, can be invaluable. A skilled therapist can help you identify your persona, explore your shadow, and navigate the often difficult process of individuation. They can point out patterns you can't see yourself because you're too close to them. They can provide support when confronting your shadow brings up difficult emotions. And they can help you integrate what you discover so that you don't just have insights, but actually transform. But there's also work you can do on your own. Start by asking yourself uncomfortable questions. Who am I when nobody's watching? What do I want that I've never admitted to anyone, including myself? If I could live any life without worrying about money, status, or other people's opinions, what would it look like? What aspects of myself have I rejected or hidden because they weren't acceptable? These questions don't have easy answers, and that's the point. You're excavating material that's been buried for years or decades. Pay attention to your resentments. Jung believed that resentment is often a sign that you've betrayed yourself. If you find yourself constantly bitter about your career, your relationship, your life choices, that's not just negativity. That's information. It's telling you that you've compromised your authentic self for the sake of maintaining a persona. Instead of suppressing that resentment or feeling guilty about it, explore it. What is it trying to tell you? What needs to change? Notice when you feel most alive. Even in a life that feels predominantly empty, there are usually moments when something clicks, when you feel engaged and present and real. Maybe it's when you're in nature. Maybe it's when you're having a deep conversation. Maybe it's when you're creating something with your hands. Maybe it's when you're helping others. These moments are clues to your authentic self. They're showing you what alignment feels like. The work is to build more of your life around these moments and less around the activities you're just going through the motions with. Be prepared for this process to be disruptive. Individuation isn't about becoming a slightly improved version of your current persona. It's about transformation, and transformation is inherently disruptive. You might realize you need to change careers, end relationships, move to a different place, completely restructure your life. Not everyone will support this. People who knew you as your persona might not recognize or like your authentic self. Some relationships might not survive your transformation. This is painful, but it's part of the process. Jung also emphasized that individuation doesn't mean becoming selfish or abandoning your responsibilities. It's not about blowing up your life impulsively. It's about finding a way to honor both your social obligations and your authentic self. Sometimes this requires creativity. Maybe you can't quit your job immediately, but you can start dedicating time to exploring your real interests. Maybe you can't end your relationship, but you can start having more honest conversations about who you really are and what you actually need. Individuation is about integration, finding ways to bring your inner truth into your outer life. One of the most challenging aspects of this work is accepting that becoming authentic might mean becoming less successful by conventional standards. Maybe your authentic self isn't interested in climbing the corporate ladder. Maybe you'd rather live simply and have time for creativity than accumulate wealth and status. Maybe you'd rather be unknown and genuine than famous and fake. Our culture makes these choices incredibly difficult because we're bombarded with messages that success, as defined by money and status and achievement, is the only thing that matters. But Jung would argue that a successful persona living an empty life is far more tragic than an authentic person living modestly but meaningfully. There's also something Jung called the collective unconscious, which includes archetypes, universal patterns, and symbols that appear across cultures and throughout history. Understanding which archetypes are active in your life can help you understand your journey. Maybe you've been living as the hero, constantly striving and achieving, and you need to explore the sage or the lover or the creator. Maybe you've been stuck in the caregiver role, constantly sacrificing yourself for others, and you need to integrate the warrior who sets boundaries and pursues personal goals. Archetypes aren't boxes to put yourself in. They're lenses for understanding the patterns and energies that shape your life. Religion and spirituality were important to Jung, not necessarily in a dogmatic sense, but as expressions of the human need for meaning and connection to something larger than the ego. Many people experiencing this existential emptiness have cut themselves off from any spiritual dimension of life. They've adopted a purely materialistic worldview where life is just about survival, reproduction, and accumulation. This worldview, Jung believed, is psychologically impoverishing. You don't have to adopt a traditional religion, but you do need to grapple with the big questions. What gives life meaning? What is your relationship to the mystery of existence? What values are worth orienting your life around? Without engaging with these questions, the emptiness persists. The beautiful and terrifying thing about individuation is that there's no template for it. You can't follow a step-by-step guide to becoming yourself because yourself is unique. The very point is to stop following external templates and start listening to your inner guidance. This is why it's so challenging. We're conditioned to look outside ourselves for answers, to follow experts and authorities and societal norms. Individuation requires developing the courage to trust yourself even when your choices don't make sense to anyone else. And here's something that might be hard to hear but needs to be said. Some people never do this work. They feel the emptiness, they recognize something is wrong, but they never take action. They stay in the comfortable prison of the persona because the alternative, confronting the shadow and becoming authentic, is too frightening. They medicate the emptiness with distractions, addictions, endless busyness, anything to avoid sitting with the existential questions that individuation raises. And they reach the end of their lives having never really lived as themselves. This is what Jung called living an unlived life, and he considered it one of the great tragedies of human existence. So where does this leave you? If you're feeling that emptiness despite your perfect-looking life, you're at a crossroads. You can continue maintaining the persona, continuing to do what you're supposed to do, hoping the emptiness eventually fades. Spoiler alert, it won't. Or you can take Jung's invitation seriously and begin the difficult, disruptive, ultimately liberating work of individuation. You can start exploring your shadow, questioning your persona, and discovering who you actually are beneath all the conditioning and expectations. This isn't a quick fix. There's no 5-step program to authentic selfhood. This is lifelong work. But it's the most important work you'll ever do, because it's the difference between existing and truly living. It's the difference between looking successful and feeling fulfilled. It's the difference between dying having lived someone else's life and dying having lived your own. If this video resonated with you, give it a thumbs up, and more importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. The emptiness we've talked about today is epidemic in our culture, but people suffer in silence because they think they're the only ones feeling this way. Let's break that silence. Let's normalize the conversation about authentic living versus persona maintenance. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are in this journey. Are you just recognizing the emptiness? Are you in the middle of an individuation crisis? Have you done this work and come out the other side? Your story matters, and it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to give themselves permission to start their own journey. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep dives into psychology, philosophy, and the questions that actually matter. Hit that notification bell because we're going to continue exploring the ideas that help us understand ourselves and live more authentic lives. This isn't about productivity hacks or life hacks. This is about the real transformation that changes everything. Remember, the emptiness isn't your enemy. It's a messenger. It's your psyche telling you that you're capable of so much more than the life you're currently living. Listen to it, honor it, and have the courage to discover who you really are. Until next time, be brave enough to be yourself.